Sahana bhavatu, sahano bhunaktu, saha viryam karvavahai, tejasvinavaditam astu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cover with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So that is wonderful. I'm pleased to be here with question answer session. And just to point out, one of the reasons why we do this is there's an old saying, not knowing is speaking and not speaking is knowing. But that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't ask questions. It means that we have to understand whatever is troubling us, clearing up our doubts and fears, enhancing our spiritual practice. And some of it is philosophy-based and some of it is practice-based. On Wednesdays, we reserve it for practice-based. So I'm going to mute the microphone as usual, so that you have the opportunity to formulate a question, and then we can discuss it. Thank you.
Pranam Swamiji. Could you explain a bit about Tanmatras?
Okay. I'll explain about Tanmatras, but first I'm going to tell a small story.
Okay.
There was a man who was traveling in a hot air balloon, and the wind blew and he blew off course, and he looked all over the place and he had no. So the balloon, the altitude lowered sufficiently enough for him to see a man in a field somewhere. And so he shouted out to this man, "Do you know where I am?" And the man looked up and he shouted back, "Yes, you're in a hot air balloon." And the man in the balloon said, "Yeah, okay, all right, but, do you know, in relation to where I am and relation to the earth, where am I?" And the man shouted back and said, "You're about 300 meters above the ground." And the man in frustration in the balloon said, yes, but you see, where exactly is my location?" And the man shouted back and said, "You're 30 degrees north and 20 degrees east." And then the man in the balloon said, "Are you an expert, something like a pundit or a scholar?" And the man in the field said, "Yes, how did you know?" He said, "Because since I met you, everything you have said to me is absolutely true, but it hasn't helped me a bit." And so we have to be careful in asking questions that they are helpful. So if you ask about Tanmatras, and there's another question I have in reserve also, you have to ask, okay, what is the practicality of knowing what these are and why they are important in the practical aspect of our philosophy? Tanmatras literally means mere elements, and they are subtle elements. You can imagine now a vast ocean. Our experience is just the crest of a wave. Our vision is very limited. When we look out to sea, for example, the horizon is limiting us. We can't see beyond it because of the curvature of the earth. I know there are people who say that the earth is flat. There's a big movement, a revival movement like that, but they obviously haven't gone cycling in Wicklow. So you see, the curvature of the earth limits our view. At the moment, if we take the broadest view we possibly can have, then we'll see that it is through a marvelous technology now called James Webb Telescope, and it looks back almost, to when galaxies and stars should not be able to form, and it's discovered huge clumps of galaxies that should not be there. Because we are limited by one factor, and that is the consensus that there is a standard unchangeable speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, and that's it. That's what we're stuck with. We cannot see further than that. So that's another limitation just in our vision of the world. Now I'm going to compare all this vast knowledge and wisdom of the so-called world that we have with a tiny crest of a crest of a crest of a wave in an ocean. So it doesn't take much understanding and intelligence to know that our view of things is extremely limited. We are only limited to 5 versions of the universe that we have. We don't have any access to the other varieties of waves in the electromagnetic spectrum, such as infrared, ultraviolet, X-ray, gamma ray, you name it. But that's not how we take it. We take that this whole universe that we live in is the sum totality of everything, and it's the operational field that we have to work in, and we have to get on with other people stuck in this, like other people, and we have to deal with different locations, and we have to deal with day-to-day different scenes and events. This is our world, and if we're not careful, we'll get caught up in it. And this getting caught up in it collectively is called ignorance. Why is it called ignorance? It's not an academic ignorance. What we mean by ignorance is that we are limited in our view, and we have taken for granted something which may not be fully there, but is convenient. Why is it convenient? It's convenient because without this view, we cannot be a practical person. But that doesn't mean that we cannot extend our view further than this crest of a crest of a crest of a wave. And this wave this crest of a wave of our world looks like particles being fired everywhere, and is interpreted in this way. It looks like individualities, and is interpreted in this way. It looks like fragments, and it's interpreted in this way. And we never consider what are the fragments, what are they fragments of? What is the sum totality? Is there a more holistic version of what we see and what we understand? And it is the Upanishads that give us very boldly and very plainly this global vision, this vision of a unitary existence, this whole understanding of a holistic way of looking at things. Still, for convenience, we have to structure things in a progressive way. A good teacher will not tell you the end conclusion. That's not a good starting point. You say, here, my child, step 1, step 2, like any child. And of course, that reminds me that it's Mother's Day here in Ireland, so happy Mother's Day to all you mothers. And those who have mothers and are not mothers, well, please think of your mothers. You see, if we look at the whole universe today, we can view it as something like a mother, since if we really cultivate a feeling of thorough observation and gratitude, then the events, the number of occasions that warrant our gratitude are infinite. And coming back to the analogy, as I have done so many times before, of the ocean, the appreciation of the ocean is vast once we understand there's an ocean. Once we can get out of our small crest vision, which only lasts 5 minutes. 5 minutes in the grand scheme of things. And anybody who understands the difference in time will have a look at how Hinduism, for example, will view the whole scale of time divided into manvantars and kalpas and ages, yugas, and all of that. And it's just an astonishing, going into the trillions of trillions of trillions of years before we think, or before the ancient people thought, perhaps, that this whole thing will go back and dissolve into its primordial origin, which itself is called Prakriti in the language of the Sankhya's and the Yogis. So this Prakriti, this nature, this origin that is held in potential, has these 3 evolutionary forces within them, and they erupt in different combinations, and that becomes our wave system. Now you can imagine that our view also has parts. It's not a single thing. We'll know that because we see other events and other versions of ourselves and other animal species and insects, and we see all this particulate universe. And so we know that it is comprised of small seeming units. And even now at a scientific level, we're looking, and we've been looking forever almost, for the tiniest possible foundational particles of this universe. And at one point we came to this atom, which was eschewed by the modern scientific community of its day, because it didn't want to go back to ancient Democritus ideas from ancient Greece. And yet, you see, it was people like Niels Bohr only in the last century. Let's say a mere 100 and more years ago, more than that, but well, let's say 100 years ago. And the first defined understanding of an atom was there. And then, of course, scientists have been researching this ever since. You can, for convenience sake, understand that our version of the world has 16 broad categories or parts. Let's examine them. How do we know the world? Well, we have to have objects. And how do we relate to these objects? We relate to them by eyes, ears, and nose. You understand the five organs of information, the five recipient things. And we know that every single organism in this universe, any single pulsing cell will absolutely understand that it is on the outside of the skin, otherwise called a membrane, that we get all our information. These are kind of gateways. And that is why, beautifully put in the Kathopanishad, the whole body is compared to a massive city belonging to one which is not born, never constructed, was never built, it'll never be destroyed. And not only that, it is not an object of anything, it is a subjective thing, and therefore it is not subject, as it were, to all the variation rules that we see and we have that are categorized as objects and things that interact with these objects, the sense organs. And so every cell will will absorb somehow what it needs. And that is why it belongs to one whose consciousness is unflickering. Now, objective consciousness is always flickering. Your attention goes here, your attention goes there. Perhaps during the course of this answer, you'll get bored and fall asleep, because it takes a great deal of effort on many occasions to take the attention and really captivate it, and then furthermore to steer it in a chosen direction. And this all requires a consciousness. It requires a driver, it requires a motivator, it requires the motivation, it requires an object to which it is driven, and all of those things. And normally our attention is steered toward things that we want, things that we desire, for our particular version of a unit, which we call aham, simply I. But this I is quite complex, because this I is variable. This I can look healthy one day and ill the next day. This I can have a sneeze one moment and be completely full of asthma or any reaction to pollen and so on and so forth the next. And we can see that one day we are enthusiastic and one day we are not. And not only one day, but one moment. One moment we can be up and one moment we can be down based on our reactions. And so 5 organs of information will also generate 5 reactions. And these reactions are also tied in with the body. So let us examine them. Well, we know that there is the organ of evacuation that is concerned with digestion and food. Food is the primary requirement for all living organisms. And then we have the organ of generation. The most successful organisms in the world are those which generate the best, the most successfully, the most prolifically. And then we have the sense of speech, expression. All organisms know in some way how to communicate and express themselves. And then, of course, there are the organs of action, grasping, these are the hands, and then there are the feet. So these are 5 more. This makes now 10. Now 10 plus the 5 objects that they relate to makes 15. And then we have a sorting office, a reception office, an office that is able to give us conscious experience and qualia. And this we call the mind. Now we have 16 for convenience sake. 16 rungs on a ladder. We can consolidate them all into 16 steps. And when we go through these 16 as one unit, we find another underlying layer. And we find that this world of general relativity, we might say it in physics terms, then merges into different combinations that come out in a concrete form that we are able to relate to. And now we go from a particulate kind of universe to a wave-like universe. This wave-like combinations of waves and fields is called Tanmatras, subtle elements. And when we know these subtle elements, we have a real clue to liberation, because we've gotten away from our standard view of the world, which comprises 16 parts. And now we have gone into another version of it. We can call it sixfold. One aspect of it would be the general understanding of self-image or individuality. And we can take it also at the atomic level, that an atom, in a sense, can be self-aware. Why do I say that? I once told this at a University of Dublin, actually, and the materialist students were just astonished. Do you mean to say every atom is conscious? I said, and looking for its freedom? I said, yes. And they all laughed. But then I said, well, okay, do you have evidence to the contrary? Tell me something. How does an electron know not to merge into the proton? And you can't just dismiss it as scientific laws, because these are laws which are completely incomprehensible. It's only an uncertainty principle. So in the 16 categories that we can put as a first step on a ladder, where we can explore something underneath, in that world, of course, it looks like particles. But in the and therefore it follows a law of determinism, a causal law, cause and effect. But in the world of the Tanmatras, we have a different kind of causality. And we can call this, instead of saying particles, we can now call it waves. And now I think we're entering into the quantum world, the world of fields of possibilities, where laws of uncertainty are there. And we can compare it, coming back to the ocean. Okay, so with the crest of the waves, what's underneath it? Underneath it is a great swell in the ocean, a wave, this whole wave system. And these become more and more subtle as we go deeper and deeper. And there are 5 of these waves. Plus, as I say, a 6th element, which is our sense of individuality. And I think, as I say, every atom even has it, because every proton separates itself from another proton in another atom. It's only the electrons that make the changes and make some dynamic relationship happening. But it's the proton that is subject to a pulling inward, a suction, which we call gravity. Electrical energy has a different program. They want to run away. They want the freedom, a little bit of freedom. So we can say, in that sense, every atom is looking for its own freedom. This is not my individual statement. Swami Vivekananda says it also when he discusses the subject of freedom. But what does it mean to be free? It means to be free from all these strictures that make a limited world, because this limited outlooking gives us painful experiences. This is the practicality then of knowing the Tanmatras. Why? Because these are not just waves. These are divine waves. These are waves of glories. These are manifested grace that combine and recombine in different proportions. We won't go into the mathematics of the proportions. I heard a funny thing earlier today. There's a kind of well, you'll see it. You'll see for what it is. That somebody says, five out of 4 people have problems with maths. And I'll leave it to yourself to work that out. And you may be one of those people that has that problem with maths. See? So we make a mistake about the world. And these different proportions come out, crystallize. And if we really understand that this is a thrust of divine grace, we will also understand that this manifested version of the world that we are living in and that we relate to is nothing more than crystallized God. And that's the beauty about understanding the Tanmatras. The mere elements, there are 5 of them. Now, the most combined element of this, we call it Prithivi. This is unfortunately translated as earth, and literally it does mean this, but it doesn't, or the translation is literally like that, but that's not the meaning of it. It's not the tangible earth that we have, that we see. And we tend to divide things into earth and sky and the intermediate space and so on. But you see, it reminds me of, there were, three religious leaders, and they were discussing how they would get funds and how much of those funds we have to use for our sustenance and how much goes to charity, because we have to do both. And one says, well, my method is quite easy. I draw a circle, and whatever funds I collect, I throw it up into the air, and whatever lands in the circle, I give to charity, and whatever's outside the circle, I keep. And the other person says, it's very curious. I have a similar thing. I also draw a circle. I also throw the accumulated funds up into the air. And whatever falls, inside the circle is mine, and what is outside I give to charity. And the third person stroked his chin a little bit and said, well, my method is very similar also. Whatever accumulated funds I have, I throw it up into the air, and whatever God wants, he takes, and whatever's left comes to me. So we tend to think Earth is something where we are grounded and we are all geocentric. That means that we have this way of speaking, that when we look into the sky, say, or at night we look up into the sky, we use the directional point of view, because we are the reference point, and everything on Earth, to make any sense, has to have a reference point. And this goes all the way. So our reference point is our own body, our own house, our own location, and everything else is relative to that. And even when we measure other stellar bodies, for example, or other planetary systems, we use that same thing. Our reference point is the Earth. We are at the center of everything in reference to the Earth. How else will you view it? And I sometimes and often say, we have a much better real understanding. We say down in the sky rather than up in the sky, because once we get out of the Earth and look around, there's no up, there's no down. It seems to be equal everywhere. Now, this is our world, but the coarsest element of it will be called Prithivi. This is a Tanmatra. It is the result of a combination, a proportional combination going from the most subtle, we can describe this as the number 1, to the number 5. And the 5th version of it is called Prithivi. This Prithivi obviously comes to us in our 16 categories as solidity. It comes as rocks. It comes as material bodies. It comes out as anything which has the quality of being solid. But in its Tanmatra state, it is really made from waves. And its energetic component is likely to be magnetism. And so just as we see that you get some rocks called magnetite, and magnetism is a core a core property, which we now have associated with electricity, also electromagnetism. And we have this one great field, electromagnetic field. But the electromagnetic field contains many, many waves, many, many different oscillations. I've mentioned some of them: gamma rays, X-rays, ultraviolet, infrared, ultrasonic, supersonic, and so on. All of these, many, many different waves, and we are only capable of catching a few. If we were to catch all of them all at once, we'd be not only complicated creatures, we'd be extremely confused. Nothing would be streamlined. So we can say that there is some divine design coming through this. And the combination that ends up as this subtle Tanmatra called Prithivi produces really the most basic production that we have, that comes through to us in our human condition, and that is the sense of smell, and all noses that catch it. So not only the instrument of it, but also the quality of it, the quality of smell. And then where does that come from? It comes as a manifested combination from number 4. What is number 4? Number 4 is described as api, or water, not literally water. But this is all fluidity, all things that flow. It manifests in our world, of course, as water. It manifests in our world as blood circulating, making things flow, and making sure that there are conduits, the combination of the earth, so to speak, the matter, and the combination of the cells, and the combination of the fluid make for our pliable cells. Without that, we don't have any flexibility in the body. And that energetically may well be associated with electricity, electrical energy. And where does this come from, and what are its properties? Well, see, all tastes and all mouths that catch them see the beautiful design in it. And where does this come from? This is coming from a coordinated manifestation from number 3. What is number 3? Number 3 is called tejas, the thing that shines. Some people may call it Agni also, fire, literally fire. And that means it's energetically, it's radiation. Radiation is a product of combined friction. And so we see that it is all forms and all eyes that catch it, or all instruments that catch these forms of colors. And don't forget, different organs at the 16 category level. All these organs are not standard organs. They'll interpret things in their own different way, because their organs will be designed differently, if you will. So there's this match, and where does this come from? Now each one is getting more and more subtle. And so now we're at number 2, and number 2 we call Yusrasi Vayu. Vayu meaning literally wind. It doesn't literally mean that, of course. What it means is that which is displayed everywhere, which infuses everything. And the subtle energetic aspect of this would have to be kinetic energy. And so this Vayu, which is spread everywhere, this Vayu produces all pressures, different kinds of pressures, and all skins that catch it. Gravity itself produces an element of pressure on primordial stuff in space. And this Vayu then comes from what is called Akasha. Akasha is primordial matter. It hardly moves. It is so subtle. Its field is space, and its energetic force is likely to be potential energy. And Akasha, the thing that really doesn't shine, the thing that is the basic mass of matter. And the yogic system says that universal energy, which we call prana, acts on universal matter, potentially there, which we call Akasha. And from this comes all these combinations. Now, what has this to do with your own spiritual development? It's each one of these is a rung on the ladder. And so we are told in the Upanishads that the method is to resolve one thing into another, into another, into another. So we resolve this common everyday world and we revalue it and see it is just simply a combination of waves. And these waves are not static. Waves are dynamic. These are dynamic things. These are things that oscillate and move and interact. But these waves are extremely subtle. They are not accessible to the everyday sense world and sense organs, but they crystallize as what we see. And these are not just, once again, these are not just waves. These are not just material. All of these are divine graces, divine waves. Now we can use our poetic imagination. All these are angels that make the crooked path straight for us. And when we understand that they are aspects of divine grace, aspects of divine glories in subtle form, we then have to see, where do these waves come from? All these waves come from a cosmic mind, a designer, an intelligence. You know, there's a system called intelligent design. And there's a great debate, if you will, or maybe potential disagreement between people who say we are evolutionists and we don't believe in an intelligent design theory. But then there's a sticking point, unfortunately, because everybody says evolution is a fact, but nobody says what is evolution. There are two types of evolution. There's cosmic evolution, and there is, or conscious evolution, if you will, and there is Darwinian evolution. And most people, when they say evolution, they're talking about Darwin's evolution. But Darwin's evolution is more to do with, we have a common origin. There's something called natural selection. We can explain variations in species through this. And Darwin was studied at the Galapagos. He studied different types of finches and understood that there were adaptations necessary in order to survive in different environments. So in a sense, the environment is the dictator, and there's an adaptability. But the adaptability has been lost because in the neosynthesis, the new version, if you will, of this, that was popular around about the 1970s and is still popular, says there has to be these components in evolution, and it goes away from Darwin's original idea. We believe in natural selection, which is an eliminative process. When things are not successful, they immediately go into extinction. And secondly, random mutation, genetic mutation, and thirdly, genetic drift. And these are the fundamentals. But modern science has declared, no, there's nothing random about it. And on the other side of the argument is intelligent design. And there's a famous book by Richard Dawkins called The Blind Watchmaker. And there was a great atheist called Fred Hoyle. He was an agnostic, basically. He didn't want the Big Bang theory of cosmology. It smacked of creation, and he wanted to get away with it, as did Einstein. But anyway, he came to this conclusion toward the end of his life. And he said, you see, if you want this to be random, if you simply want by chance, there's absolutely no way it can happen. The chances are enormous, like 10 to the power of 400 or some ridiculous figure, because you have to take into account how amino acids get structured in a certain order. You have to take into account, how it is that you cannot take a junkyard, was his example, a very famous example. You cannot take a vast junkyard and, given enough time, think that by itself it will assemble into a Boeing 747. That was his example. This is just not possible. It won't happen. And then Darwin at one point had said, if you give enough monkeys typewriters and enough time, they will be able to write a Shakespearean sonnet. In other words, duplicate exactly what the ingenuity of man can do and the creativity of man can do. But then he realized the statistical impossibility of doing this. And so his next version says, yes, okay, I revise this, provided there's a supervisor monkey. Now he's going back to intelligent design. So we don't go along with the fact that the supreme principle is an intelligent designer on this basis, philosophical grounds. Supposing God and I are walking and we come across a vast river, we cannot by ourselves cross it. And I ask God, see, you're the designer, the design engineer of the whole universe, and will you please construct a bridge so we can cross? What use is that? God, being all powerful, can simply by a mere whim take us across the other side. And that is the flaw of the design. For what purpose? It creates many philosophical difficulties. But it certainly looks as if it's designed, and in some way we can say, because it comes from a cosmic mind. And then from the cosmic mind, from there downwards, as it were, to the very 16th particle, as it were, of our familiar world, the whole thing emanating from one cosmic mind can look like a cosmic person. What we see on this microcosmic scale, we can see on the macrocosmic scale. But Darwinism and its modern synthesis, as we call it, what we call neo-Darwinism, first of all, ignores the fact that chance cannot get you anywhere. Random mutation doesn't get you into any positive conditions because there are enough fail-safe mechanisms within the cell to correct any misduplication or any anomaly. Anomalies will be there, no doubt. Yes. But the cell knows by combining, who knows? So many they haven't really found out exactly. But there's a cooperative system in the cell that puts into practice a fail-safe version 1, version 2, version 3, and anything that escapes that comes out as a random mutation, which always fails in the survival. So you can't say that. And genetic drift is along the same lines. The best we can say is, yes, natural selection to some extent is there, but cannot explain this huge jump. So there was a Stephen Gould, who was an evolutionist, who said, you see, there has to be some punctuation within it. There has to be more than what you're saying. Darwin's whole system of evolution depended on a long, steady period of time, but it doesn't work when you calculate it. And there are these moments, such as the Cambrian explosion, where things happen, punctuated equilibrium comes, and some urge takes on, and a new trend takes on, and so it goes on like that. And so if you say, yes, the law of nature being constant, let's view the whole universe, the whole of existence, as something like a cosmic person. And now we come across an ancient text from the Rig Veda, the Purusha Suktam, that declares this, that says, sees this universe as one person with all the components of a human individual, including a mind. And this mind is not a limited mind. This mind is an ever-free mind. This mind is a cosmic mind. We can call this mind cosmic consciousness. So that when we understand the Tanmatras, we are seeing these emanations from the cosmic mind going out, combining, recombining, and our reaction must inevitably be, what a glory, what a glory. But our version from the 16 particulate point of view is, what a pity, nobody likes me. The other aspect, what a glory, my potential is unlimited. Swami Vivekananda declares, once we are able to control the universal energy, which we call prana, that is manifested actively by this cosmic mind, once we're able to do that, we will have controlled all the energy in the entire universe. The whole universe we will have controlled. What an astonishing statement. And then where does this energy ultimately come from? it comes essentially, the cosmic mind is born, as it were, as the first manifestation. And it is made from pure sattva. What is sattva? Well, the Bhagavad Gita has a whole chapter on this and the threefold nature of everything. And so, how do we get to this point? We get to this point of revelation, or what we might even call in our own context, self-realization of our own freedom, by using this pure element which is there in the cosmic mind, by setting up a relationship with it. And from a devout worshipper's point of view, setting up a relationship of love with this, so that the cosmic mind is the personal God. It is the cosmic Christ. It is the cosmic Buddha. It is the cosmic Ramakrishna. It is the cosmic consciousness. And it is this cosmic consciousness which is also described in philosophy as logos, nous, other language like this, or John's Gospel, if you're a Christian. In the beginning was the Word. This is the Word that manifests from this cosmic mind, the first expressive wave, the first thought, which comes out to us at the other end of it in human sound as Om. Om is its first manifestation, its first movement. And this Om combines and recombines as other different sounds, because vibration, given the fact that we have a cerebral organ to catch it, all vibration comes out as sound when it goes to an instrument. So for this reason, all the Tanmatras will have a sound. And the yogis identify these sounds as bija mantras, that is, seed mantras, that to the ear, the inner ear of the yogi can be heard. And now we come to the language of the yogis. In the language of the yogis, we come to this very famous term called chakras. What is a chakra? A wheel. A wheel implies a vortex. Something is caught up somewhere. And in the case of the language of the yogis, each one of these chakras relates to each one of these tanmatras. And each one of these tanmatras, so the very lowest Muladhara, relates to Prithivi, the earth. Swadhisthana is the next one. It relates to this element of this tanmatra, unfortunately described as water. And the next one relates to, whose bija mantra is Rang, relates to this aspect of fire, if you will, or radiance, if you will. And then the heart. This heart comes out as something where you can't catch two sounds, two surfaces don't contact each other, anahata. And so this corresponds to this vayu, where spirituality starts really developing, because it means that our heart, this love and being loved, now flows everywhere in all directions. And in the symbolic visual language of the yogis, has a system of two triangles interlocked, displaying it's going in all directions, and 12 lotus petals going in all directions. And then we have Akasha. All this comes from Akasha. Akasha corresponds in the yogic language to Vishuddha. Vishuddha, and this is pure consciousness. There, all boundaries have gone. There we make a distinction, because we can see, if you view it like a ladder, you can see, oh, all the rungs are there, and I've now arrived at this point. And then that goes into this cosmic mind that we call Ajna, which is described like this two-petaled lotus. This glorious, its characteristic is brilliant white, according to the language of the yogis. And so there we find this pure consciousness, which is there, this conscious, cosmic consciousness. And then that then develops or opens up into our full liberation. In the language of the yogis, described as sahasrara, 1,000-petaled. 1,000 doesn't mean we can count 1 to 1,000. It means unlimited, infinite. It's all symbolic. And in the language of the tantrikas, the primordial energy that was gathered in from our 16, our diversion within our world of the 16 categories. These 16 categories are normal working, waking life, which is comprised of the objects of our senses, the sense organs of action and the sense organs of information, and the mind. So these 16 characteristics are there. And within that little world this is where we're operating. And all our energy, all our attention is normally diverted in this way. But the spiritual aspirant learns to gather all of this in and concentrate them and gives them a new direction, which becomes a revealing direction, opening up each level or each step of the step ladder to pure glory. And each rung is an opening up of our consciousness, opening up every level and layer of our consciousness that is going into the universe until we discover ultimately this one without a second, as described, where there is no two. And then we have gone beyond the borders of nature. This cosmic mind comes from the lower part of this. The cosmic mind comes from this potentiality where all the forces of nature are held in equilibrium and then disrupt into cosmic mind. And from cosmic mind, the Tanmatras plus ego. And from the Tanmatras plus ego comes 16 varieties of objects, senses, and mind. So we can now have a fresh view of the whole universe when we see this. And spiritual progress then is a question of going from our attention span that we have here, our working, waking life of waking experiences, and then going into the understanding, the real empirical understanding, first of all of the lowest Tanmatra, and then the next one, 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 ascending the ladder, as it were, and opening up with each ascension until we become one with the cosmic mind, and then we become one with its nature, and then we become one because from that point of view, there's no becoming. We are that. And that realization declares it. I am that. And that is all that is. And there are no varieties. All the fragments are gone at that point. So this is the utility of understanding the Tanmatras and viewing the world as these varieties of waves. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, Swamiji, thank you.
There's a question here. Let me just try and get it. Question is, what's the process to get into the first step of the ladder? The process is viveka. That's the process. When we talk about practice, we're talking about the practice of discernment. You see, at the moment, we don't have discernment, most of us. Most people mix everything up. Most people endorse this world is reality. You see, this prayer which is there, which is so often chanted, Asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyoti gamaya, mrijo amritam gamaya, and all variations of one theme. So if we pray, let us go from, please take us from the unreal to the real, it means we are living in a kind of unreality. It doesn't mean to say when I bang my head on a wall, the wall isn't there and my head is not developing a bump. No. Unreality means we've misunderstood the variations going on. The waves that are caught up by the senses and made into the limited exclusive world, and where we see a continuum as a solid static thing. This misleading is called avidya, ignorance, and it's called unreality. So it's called asato, something that is not existent. And so we have to learn to have this discrimination. Now, along with this discrimination will come a sense of thankfulness with it. Because not only do I know what you are not, but I know what you are. You are this flowing love that is going through all eyes and all hands and all ears, this tremendous energy that is driving things, a sense of deep appreciation, which gives rise to a deep love. And so cultivating love of God comes along with this discrimination for most people, for devout worshippers. Taking your attention and seeing, Lord, you are here, Lord, you are there, and seeing all the 16 things and all the Tanmatras as simply divine energies. Lord, this is your grace flowing, your grace flowing, your grace flowing, your grace flowing. Thanks, thanks, thanks. Until a loving attitude is there as a reciprocation to the love that is flowing as divine grace, which is everywhere. There is nowhere where it's not. So this is called viveka, discernment. And this viveka gives us a withdrawal of the attention and a steering towards something that is more revealing and useful. This is called detachment, vairagya. So this is what is practice. Now we can view it in a different way. What is very useful is to see if we can play a kind of game, a kind of sport. What is that sport? That sport will divide everything that is understood into three categories. These three categories we call sattva, rajas, and tamas. And this constant classification will also be a kind of viveka. This is the practical side of it. So if you choose, you can play a game by enacting various attractive sattvic scenes in your mind. And when you do this, you can do this waking, or you can do it in meditation. In meditation, it's more real, it is more profound because it's more intense. And so in this way, you can avoid adopting an intolerant fighting with any other egoistic forces. You can have a hostile attitude. You can say, oh, I see a wave in the mind coming here. It's jealousy or anger. So I should push it down or I should fight against it. I'll determine not to do it and things like that. Psychologically, that would be not only difficult, but it would be a worse technique because we know every action has an equal and opposite reaction. You cannot suppress anything. It's not a good technique. You want to train a horse, you can whip it, of course, into submission. It's much better to coax it from the side. Do it in a subtle way. So we don't have to fight against rajas and tamas representing egoistic activity or egoistic laziness. So what is wanted is to fill the habit level with feelings of thankfulness and adoration instead. That's the technique. And we'll find that the only gateway to the habit level is the conscious level, the conscious mind, the conscious field. We can't attack the subconscious level. We can't say, I have all these samskaras, all these old memories, all these traits, all these habits. I was born with them. I give up. There's nothing I can do. You can't reform the unconscious level because it's only there through the gateway of the conscious mind in the first place. And so the true value of scriptural study, holy company, worship, making gifts, all of this lies in this gateway to the habit level of the conscious mind. This is called a discipline. This is called spiritual practice. And even these, of course, can be polluted because we could allow them to be dominated by rajas and tamas. For example, we could say, oh, I'm a religious person, I go to church, or we could give things away to a hospital and then make sure that there's a plaque on the side of the wall. See, in honor of us, we are the primary donor, things like this. And so we have to develop a kind of good-humored sort of vigilance. I think one of our greatest tools that we have is looking at the world in such a way that a sense of humor comes out straight away as an immediate response. And these disciplines can be undertaken in a high or by a high sattvic spirit. Sattva meaning all these things characteristic of illumination, of purity, of removing any kind of confusion. So we soon learn that we can employ this sattva element of all the noble qualities we can think of and the most beautiful scenes that we can bring to our mind, taken, let us say, from the beauty of nature, perhaps an ocean scene or a mountain scene or a river scene, and how we felt about it, bringing these all up. And as soon as we do this, we can realize that employing this sattva, whenever we detect these other elements of rajas and tamas entering into our mental field, then we can establish control in this way. And so, for this reason, there are many, many scriptures which are dedicated directly or indirectly to the subject. There's one whole chapter which dedicates this idea of distinction between these three elements, and it is the 17th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is really dedicated to that whole subject, so that any diligent study of this chapter will certainly tell us what is classified as sattva, what is classified as rajas and tamas in every single dimension of our life. And so this is the yoga of the threefold faith, as it's called. And so it is, and don't forget, you see, every chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is a yoga shastra. It's called yoga shastre. So this Shadatraya chapter of Vibhaga Yoga, this is this yoga of the threefold faith, which is the 17th chapter. This is the diligent game we have to play. If we don't play it with a sense of humor and vigilance and play the game in the psychic field, the field of the mental events, then we'll be racked with struggle, guilt, remorse, and many other negative things, which in themselves will either be rajasic or tamasic. And that defeats the whole object. So to bring up waves, if the whole universe is constructed of waves of three kinds, then the only way is to deliberately and consciously raise up waves of sattva. And that immediately neutralizes all the other waves of rajas and tamas. And the more we do it, the more it settles down on the habit level and becomes our second nature and then our first nature. So that's the answer. All right, so.
Thanks, Swamiji.
Now, I have one question for everybody here, really. There are people who join us who are, of course, outside the country and outside Dublin. But you see, what happened with COVID was that people got used to doing things as we're doing it here on Zoom and YouTube and so on, missing the value and the golden opportunity of coming to a place, and not just a place where we can discuss things live and where we have the advantage of an atmosphere of the place. And that is why we have things like ashrams and monasteries and all of those kinds of places. And so I'm sitting here, it's a Sunday morning, and I remember a time where we used to have a number of people coming for these talks. And so I'm sitting here and I'm the only person here. Nobody else is here. And on a Sunday, we used to carry this on in informal discussions. We used to have lunch together. And some people had said, you know, the most valuable thing was not the talk or the question answer session that was formally held, but the informal things, informal discussions we used to have over lunch. And so I think somehow I would ask you to give some deliberation to how we can bring that back, because we have a place here, fully bought and paid for, but what's the use of a place if it's completely empty? And I think that's a tragic situation. So there's a great benefit in this communal, fraternal feeling or sororital feeling of getting together and discussing. I would ask you to give some consideration to this problem. Same thing on a Tuesday night. On a Tuesday night, when I have my talks, there used to be, easily a dozen people at the very least. And then we would have some supper together and so on. And the people who remember Blessington Street would say, we used to enjoy the informal discussions. And Sunday we used to have something called having tea with the Swami. And this was the most valuable thing to us, see. So somehow we have lost this. COVID was a factor, there's no doubt in it. So it is my profound hope that we're able to get back to these satsangs, these proper satsangs again. Anyway, with that, I'll love and leave you. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Om